I've had numerous exchanges with a bunch of subscribers and friends and people who follow my channel. And first of all, thank you to those of you who have. You can reach me at Dr. Frog at seethingfrog.com. No spaces, of course. I thought I would just give a brief rundown of some of the things that I see happening. Most of you have followed this at least as closely as I have. I have some thoughts about it. First of all, the House voted to proceed on the impeachment, and it was pretty much down party lines. I think it's still really unclear whether they have done this in a de minimis fashion with constitutionality. I mean, obviously you have to have charges that you think are viable for the process, but the truth of the matter is, does it really matter? This is a political process. This is under the article in the Constitution that has to do with Congress, with the branch that has to do with Congress, and for all practical purposes, they make up their own rules. And so the House currently is going to make up its own rules. Is there precedent? Yes, of course there is. Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton both were ultimately voted on in impeachment, and Richard Nixon had an extensive hearing process that was undertaken before he resigned to stop the vote with regard to impeachment. And again, let's just make sure we understand. Impeachment is in fact an indictment. Impeachment is saying we believe there's probable cause in effect to remove the president, and that if in fact the probable cause, the 435 members in the House who hear the matter decide by a majority vote to pass it to the Senate, what they have in effect said is, we believe there is a basis for charges upon which the Senate can have a hearing and can rule on and decide whether to convict him on impeachment and thereby remove him from office, which in fact would be the process. I talked to Farmer Jones the other day, and he was saying, well, do you think Trump can go into the Supreme Court and get the process modified because they're not following the process of previous impeachments? And my answer, such as it is, he was more circumspect and felt that the Supreme Court might well rule on it. I'm going to say to you that the Supreme Court will pass. And the Supreme Court will pass, first of all, because I think it's Article 2 of the Constitution, which has to do with Congress, is within the purview of Congress. It's not within the purview of the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court cannot set the rules for how Congress is going to operate its own impeachment. So apart from some fundamental ruling to the contrary, that is a fundamental Bill of Rights breach, the Congress can do what it wants to do. And I don't think that President Trump's rights as the president or as a citizen supersedes Congress's right to operate in the process of impeachment if in fact the rules are anywhere close to reasonable. So that's the first part. The second part is, and I know many of you are not fully aware of this, in the Senate, in order for there to be a removal from office, that is a conviction on impeachment, a removal in office by the Senate, it takes 67 votes, or 2/3 majority. 66 won't do it. That's less than 2/3. That's only 66%. So, and if some of you have not looked and you care to look, I believe that Andrew Johnson's vote for conviction on his impeachment in the 1860s was within one vote. And they literally dragged a guy in a stretcher, if I recall correctly, that was on deathbed to vote to offset the process. So will he be convicted of impeachment? Not unless all the neocons pile on with the Democrats and vote to remove him. And of course, there are some, and many of you know this stuff, that Mittens Romney is running around with John Bolton, who's got his nose out of joint for being fired, and maybe somebody else, and they're running around trying to get as many senators lined up to convict President Trump as possible, because of course Mittens would like to run for president, the evil bastard that he is, forgive my French. And John Bolton, who got fired, as I have said to you on other occasions, I'd like to have about 10 minutes in the cage with John Bolton. And I'm not speaking about violence here. I'm not advocating violence against John Bolton, but I would like to have 10 minutes with him. And I guarantee you that I'll mop up the blood from his corpse with his nasty little mustache before the 10 minutes is over. I just guarantee it. So, because he needs it. And if we ever clean the swamp, he's a swamp creature that needs to be twisted in the wind for several days, along with a whole bunch of others. And I think someday I'm going to do a video on, and I would love to have you tell me, I'd like to do a video on how publicly the convictions for high treason ought to be cared for. And it ought not be a private execution, electrocution, just to quietly take care of it like they did, what was it, the Rosenbergs. No. We want Ethel and whatever his name was. We want if there's going to be high treason, and it goes to the heart of the nation and the structure of the nation, and the people convicted of high treason are so convicted for having been traitors to this country, fundamental traitors to this country, then they should be publicly executed, and it should be on the Washington Plaza or Mall, whatever they call it. There should be scaffolds and guillotines, and I don't care, crucifixes for that matter, for those people to be publicly executed. And if you'd like to have me expound upon that, I would love to do it. But it's grisly. So, as many of you may know, subject number 2, a pathologist that's been involved in almost every major assassination, murder, etc., political crime for the last 50-odd years, who oversaw the Epstein autopsy, has come in and said that he believes that Epstein was strangled, that he did not commit suicide, and apparently there are 3 bone breaks that would manifestly almost never happen if he was engaged in a suicide, a hanging by suicide, where he was simply dropping down a foot or 2 and smothering himself, suffocating himself. Number 3, President Trump has announced the al-Baghdadi death, and I can't do it any better than the CorbettReport does. I urge you, and I will link, there's be a link in my little comments that are right below the screen here. There's a link to the CorbettReport, and I am going to share with you the 2 things that I think critical to this process. Number 1 is, how many times has al-Baghdadi been announced to have been injured, killed, captured, etc.? If he was alive for all those times, then he's a cat, because he has survived 4, 5, 6, 7 times of death or near-death experiences, and the announcements, as someone has once said, the announcements of my death are premature. And he might say so again. And is he in fact dead now? Yeah, well, we got the DNA reports, but is he in fact dead? Or is he with Epstein on some island somewhere, and they're both sipping Mai Tais and laughing and giggling about having both been CIA agents in the past, and al-Baghdadi supposedly is a guy named Seth, who is really a Jewish Mossad operative, not Muslim at all, and this is all, ISIS is all just a big setup. That's the greater likelihood. So whether the two of them would hang out together, I don't know. Their proclivity for criminality, at least on the surface of it, is significantly different. So the second thing that Corbett talks about, and I think this is a critically important thing for those who care to know. I mean, if what you want is me to rah-rah this thing and to say, gosh, you know, we're just 2 ticks from having this thing all cared for, and the bad guys are about ready to be taken down, and the guy, the platinum knight on a white horse is going to fix it for us with Q, then don't listen to this, because this is the next thing I have to say, and that is, how many times, not only how many times has Baghdadi been killed, but if you look at the report given by President Trump about the announcement of the Baghdadi raid and the rest of that, and the seriousness, and everybody shot, and who got saved, and how many people died, and who was in the compound, if you look at the critical elements of it, it is so much like the Obama report on Osama bin Laden being killed that it makes one queasy. It certainly made me queasy. Did they just take out a folder and say, well, let's change the actual facts? The dates are different, the names are different, the compound is different, the method of death is different, but we've managed to destroy it in both cases, and nobody got injured in both cases, and there are multiple wives and children in both cases, and we got a lot of similarities, and gosh, don't I look good. And I would say to you, that is nasty business. What it does is it flags for me one more reason why I doubt that anything positive is happening. And that is that President Trump has taken the opportunity to do a twin repeat of Obama in making it look like, by gosh, I'm out there killing the bad guys, and that's just crazy stuff. I want to say to you another thing about that I just got done looking at. There are a couple other things that are pretty critical. One of them is that President Trump has gone into this whole red flag business and the Second Amendment. And on one hand, he says, you know, I'm going to protect your rights for the Second Amendment. And on the other hand, he says over and over again, you know, that it's really inconvenient for us to have judicial hearings before we take the guns away. So let's take the guns away first, and then we'll have the due process hearings. And I'm going to tell you that that fundamentally violates the Constitution. I don't know whether the president understands that or not, and I hate to sound condescending about him, but fundamentally, folks, we do things through due process and then take the arms. Are there occasions where we take the arms first and do so now and then have hearings? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. If I call up the local sheriff's department or 911 or make an announcement or get on Facebook and say, you know, I've had a big fight with so-and-so and I'm going to go take him out, then, and I'm not saying that, okay, I'm not saying that, then in the reasonable anticipation that a crime is about to be committed, they may in fact attempt to stop, the police department to attempt to stop and arrest me and to see whether or not it's real, and in that process confiscate the firearms, especially if they're on my person or within my purview. And for that, there would be a hearing then to see whether there was probable cause to believe that I, in fact, crossed the threshold to have committed a crime. There are also occasions where, in fact, they can interfere with our fundamental rights without having due process hearings prior to it. Let me give you an example, something that I did a number of times was appointed to represent people where, in fact, there was serious question about whether they were mentally ill. And in order to be claimed to be mentally ill, they have to have threatened either themselves or somebody else in a way that put life or limb or their safety in serious and immediate question. And in those cases, they would snatch the person up, but they had 72 hours during which to review and consider it and to file formal charges as to why that person ought to be held for mental incompetency. And if they did not do so within that time frame, then they would have to release the person, if they could not make the hearing within 72 hours before the judge, with the person having an entitlement to have an attorney and have his or her own witnesses, then they had to release the person. And I'm going to say, I've got two great stories to tell you if anybody wants to know. Great stories. Anyway, all right. There is also a consideration of a couple other things. One of them is I watched, I think it's called the Kaiser Report on RT recently. I am unsettled about that guy, but he does provide some interesting information. And one of the things that it flashed for me what has to do with this gold standard business and why this gold standard might make a difference. And I thought it was one of the most profound things, which is why I'm sharing it, that I've heard in many, many years, at least as it relates to the gold standard. And that is this: where the kings and leaders and monarchs had to put real assets on the line to go to war, they were much more cautious about when they did it than they are now. And the reason for it is that in days of old, when you had to have real money, you had to mount an army, you had to put people in the field, you had to buy munitions, you had to pay for ships and the rest of that, you had to shell out gold or silver or whatever the commodity was in order to get your action undertaken. Today, with fiat currency, we can simply say to the Zionist banksters, well, the government can say, I'd like to go to war in Afghanistan or stay in war in Afghanistan, and I know it's costing $1 trillion every 3 or 4 years, but let me just borrow the money. I'll just write you an IOU, and you pay for everybody that goes there. And that's what's happening. Take away the IOUs, take away the fiat currency, put someone in the place where they have to scrape up real gold or silver or combinations thereof in order to put troops in the field. And I guarantee you there would be fewer troops in the field. And not only that, it would get bankers out of war, because the bankers would not be able to leverage people into war or to pay for people to be in war if there weren't real gold. And paying for both sides, as we have done for 40 or 50 or 60 years on an ongoing basis, where the CIA is on one side and we're on the other, supposedly, and we're paying for both sides, and you and I as taxpayers are paying for it. And whether it's part of a black budget underground or whether it's part of a budget that's never been audited in 30 years, or whether they just simply wrote the check with real gold involved, it would be a totally different matter. I think it's a great thought and worth consideration. So the final thing I want to talk about today, and I lost track of it, or I would have added in here, and I went back to YouTube to find the video that I saw on this, and of course it's not there, or at least it's not visible to me as part of the history of what I've looked at. And it is this: that those latest fires, what do they call this, Kincade fires, if you take a look at it, and somebody has done this, where those fires have sprouted up, where they have initiated, those fires are in grids, and they are in grids so many square miles not just 1 or 2 or 4 of them, but 20 of them. If you look at them, they all map out. Now there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different grids, but 40 or 50 or 60 fires, all of them are in some fashion either in a linear grid or in a quad grid. It's almost like somebody took a chessboard, set it on top of California, and took the corners of the chess squares and said, fire, 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 fire. And what that tells me, of course, is that they're using DEW weapons or some other form of weapon, or they are using the transformers and the grid pattern of pg&e to set the fires. So they are not spontaneous fires. They are not lightning fires. They're not some other form of natural phenomenon. They are man-started fires, and they are evil man-started fires, and they are started to play games with all of us. One can question whether or not the dryness, the lack of rain, the high winds, and the rest of that are part of the HARP game playing with weather, whether or not the chemtrails that dropped into it and that increased the film may have made it worse as well. Goodness knows. But there is no question when you put a grid up and you can see that the fires began in a grid pattern, you have to say, look, this is man-made stuff. And when they tell us it's not, we know they're lying. So the craziness continues. I find it sad to say. I know some of you are saying, well, the goodness is just around the corner. The good guys are just ready to take over. All of this is about to happen. And I have to say to you, I want to see something absolutely concrete that's happening. Frog March, one of the bad guys, knock down the chemtrails, give an announcement of this stuff, bring Assange back into the process, and follow through on it. Now, a final note, and this irritated the hell out of me, that in the press conference that Trump did about al-Baghdadi, he went into, and this is about 42 or 3 minutes into the conference, he went into detail about having written a book in the 90s and saying that, hey, you know, I'm telling you, this Osama bin Laden's a bad guy. And then Trump goes on to say, you see, I was prophetic here. If they had listened to me, 9/11 would not have been attacked. The whole world would have been different. President Trump told us in the South Carolina primary debate that, and he faced off with Jebby Stewart, whatever his name is, Bush, about how if he were elected, he would tell us what really happened on 9/11. Well, telling us that Osama bin Laden caused 9/11 is the farthest conspiratorial crap statement, and to take a brag on it for having pointed it out before Osama bin Laden actually caused it is total craziness. I mean, that's doubling down on devious misinformation, and I am sorry to see that he did that. We need the truth. Somewhere, sometime, somebody has to give us the truth. I hate to put it that way, but I don't know how else to put it. Thanks so much for watching. There's my little Phrogspeak for the day. Thanks again. If you like it, give a thumbs up, and good luck to all of us, right?